Undertow at the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk is the park's main family coaster, and it's a spinning coaster by Maurer. In this video, I intend to give you all the information you need before taking a spin, pun intended, on this roller coaster. First things first, this coaster originally opened at the end of 2013, and it's the park's only spinning coaster. It was also the only spinning coaster in Northern California at the time of its opening. Since then, Sidewinder Safari opened at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom for the 2022 season. Luckily, both of these coasters are very different despite the fact that they're both spinners. I'll get into which one I prefer at the end of this video, but for now, let's focus on Undertow at the boardwalk. There are multiple entry and exit points into the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, but if you go through the main one, it's pretty difficult to miss Undertow as it's right near the front of the park. This placement is important for a few reasons. Number one, it gets you excited for your day to see a roller coaster, because Giant Dipper isn't really too visible from the front entrance. And number two, and more importantly, this coaster can build up a line quickly. On both of our rides, we waited 25 to 35 minutes, which isn't terrible, but the line can get pretty long because of those four-person vehicles. When we went, it wasn't terribly busy, which was really nice, but I've seen videos where this place is absolutely slammed, and in that case, it's vital to get to this coaster early. A few more operational notes. Number one, Santa Cruz closes the line of this coaster at closing time, so if you want to jump in line right before the park closes, you should be able to do that. Number two, they load trains very efficiently, and the capacity of this coaster is better than you might expect for four-person vehicles. One of the reasons why the operations are pretty quick on this ride is the fact that there are lockers. Well, sort of. There are lockers at the base of the queue, but right before you load the coaster, there are double-sided cubbies that you put your things in. This is a brilliant design. The brilliance of this setup is twofold. Number one, you don't have your stuff with you when you load the coaster, so it makes it much easier to check restraints, and it's overall more efficient. But number two, you get to have your stuff with you for the entire queue, which, as I said, could be pretty lengthy. As a whole, Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk really does an amazing job with their operations and their overall queue management, and this is another example of how they excel in that department. While looking at the layout for Undertow, you may notice that it looks familiar, and if you thought that, you'd be correct. This is one of the Maurer SC2000 models. It's one of 9 of these coasters out there. That being said, the closest one is in Farmington, Utah with Spider, so it's not really a huge issue here. So let's get into the actual ride layout of Undertow. After a right-hand turn out of the station, you're either going to be facing forwards or backwards up the lift hill. I think backwards is the better position to be sitting at here, because then you take the first drop backwards. The top height of this coaster is only 50 feet, but after a small little dip, you go down that first drop, which has some zip to it as you reach speeds of 40 miles an hour. I think this would have to be my favorite moment on Undertow. It's the moment where you reach that top speed, I would think, of 40 miles an hour, and I think it has the most zip of any moment on the ride. Plus, right before you go down that drop, you get a pretty neat view as well. And if you take this drop backwards, it makes it feel more thrilling than it actually is. Undertow from here isn't the most extreme of coasters. After going through what looks like a wild mouse section, except you don't really get laterals, you start to spin. Because it's a free spinning coaster and not a controlled one, depending on the weight in the vehicle, the spinning can be different on each ride experience. After a little dip that you'll probably take sideways, you go up into the next best element, a horseshoe turn. It doesn't last long, but this is probably my next favorite element besides the drop. From here, Undertow doesn't really have any more standout elements. You hit a set of brakes before going around some mild turns. This section is tame and not overly exciting, but a redeeming quality is that you might spin a little bit and you get a decent view of the ocean depending on the side that you face. After another set of brakes, you go through a downward helix, which is probably the next best moment on Undertow besides the two we mentioned earlier. From here, you go through another mid-course brake run before maneuvering your way to the final brakes. So overall, Undertow is not a very long coaster, and it really only has one standout moment with that first drop. Now, to be fair, Undertow only has 1,410 feet of track, and when you look at it, they actually fit a lot of coaster into a very small space. I still failed to mention the best part about the ride experience though, and that is the smoothness. Of the 51 coasters I've been on, this might be the smoothest. Maurer did a really good job making this coaster butter smooth, and evidently Santa Cruz has done a good job maintaining it as well. One thing I should mention is all the mid-course brake runs. I didn't take issue with them personally, but I know other coaster enthusiasts that have criticized this coaster's pacing and say that those brake runs slow down the spinning, which is definitely true. I don't have other experience with the other Maurer SC2000 roller coasters, and if I did, I would probably be more critical on those mid-course brake runs. but since I haven't experienced those, I don't really have anything to compare it to. All that to say is if this park and this roller coaster dialed back on the mid-course brake runs a little bit, I think it would make it a lot more enjoyable as a thrill seeker. That's not to say I didn't enjoy it though, and I think it's a good family coaster for Santa Cruz, especially because of how little space it takes up. So now, the final score. I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. This is not a bad roller coaster by any means. I found it quite fun. I just can't really justify a much higher rating than that because of the ride's limitations and because it really only has one or two really standout-ish moments. Now let's go back to Viz versus Sidewinder Safari. Of course, these are very different coasters. Zamperla built Sidewinder Safari and it's a spinning wild mouse coaster, but I do think I prefer Undertow. This is for a few reasons: the smoothness, the view, and the variation in elements. I think there's a little more variety on Undertow than Sidewinder Safari. But let me know what you guys think. Do you prefer Maurer spinners or spinning wild mouse coasters? And as always, stay tuned for more videos coming soon, and I'll see you all next time.